The betrayal of Tessa Mitchell's father. Tessa Mitchell had dedicated her entire youth to Mitchell Enterprises, believing it to be the family legacy, the place where she could continue her father's empire. She had worked tirelessly, shaping financial strategies, expanding investments, and saving the company from crisis countless times. To her, it was more than just a job. It was her life, her passion, and the ultimate proof of her capabilities. But everything she believed in shattered with a single phone call. Her father, the man she thought valued and recognized her efforts, cast her aside without hesitation. "Tessa, I've given everything to Liam. You're no longer part of the company." The words hit her like a direct punch to the gut, leaving her breathless. For a moment, she thought she had misheard, but the calmness in his voice confirmed the truth. He hadn't hesitated. He hadn't even considered all that she had done to build the company. She wasn't some outsider. She had lived, breathed, and fought for the success of Mitchell Enterprises, and now all she had left was betrayal. Not just losing a position. Losing an illusion. The worst part wasn't losing a title. It was realizing that she had never truly been acknowledged. In her father's eyes, Liam, the irresponsible, inexperienced younger brother, was the rightful heir. Tessa had witnessed Liam waste money recklessly, neglect his duties, and fail at every business venture. And yet somehow, he was still their father's choice. Not because of talent, but because he was a son. Because he was the rightful heir in their father's old-fashioned mindset. That truth cut deeper than any financial loss. Not just because it was unfair, but because Tessa had naively believed that hard work alone would earn her the recognition she deserved. A silent declaration of war. But Tessa was not someone who begged. She would never plead or grovel for fairness. At that moment, when she heard her father's words, she realized one crucial truth. She didn't need his approval. She didn't need anyone to grant her success. She was the one who had created value, who had turned this company into a powerhouse. And if her father had chosen the wrong person, then he and Liam would have to face the consequences. She swallowed her emotions, showing no anger, no pain. She simply replied with a calm, steady voice, "Thank you for letting me know." She knew her father expected a different reaction, perhaps pleading, a heated argument, or even desperation. But she gave him nothing, because this battle would not be won with emotions, it would be won with strategy. The calm before the storm. Tessa sat in her office, gazing out at the streets of Austin, where she had spent years building her career. But instead of pain, she felt determination. If her father thought she would accept defeat, he was mistaken. If he believed he could cast her aside so easily, he had severely underestimated her. Mitchell Enterprises wasn't just her father's, it was hers. And if she couldn't have it, then no one would. She opened her desk drawer and pulled out a black notebook, filled with records of financial transactions, weak points, and reckless decisions her father had made. Inside, it was everything she needed to bring the company down from the inside. If they had chosen to discard her, they would have to face the consequences. Her father had made a grave mistake. He had taught her how to fight, but had forgotten that she was his best student. This power game wasn't over. It had only just begun. The signs of betrayal. Tessa Mitchell was not someone who gave up easily. For over 2 decades, she had devoted herself to Mitchell Enterprises, believing she was its backbone, ensuring smooth operations and making bold financial moves that secured its success. She wasn't just a paper heir, she was the strategist behind every major decision, the mind that kept the company moving forward. But over the past year, things had begun to shift in ways she never expected. The subtle changes. At first, they were small signs. Meetings she was no longer invited to. Financial reports that mysteriously never reached her desk. Discussions about expansion plans that no longer included her. Instead, there were more secret meetings between her father and Liam. Tessa wanted to believe it was a coincidence, that it was just an administrative oversight. But her instincts told her otherwise. Liam's sudden interest in the company. Liam had never cared about the company. While Tessa spent her youth negotiating with investors and making tough business decisions, Liam had spent his years burning through millions at nightclubs, luxury vacations, and failed business ventures. He had no vision, no discipline, and no sense of responsibility. So why now? Why was he suddenly so involved in Mitchell Enterprises? Tessa didn't want to suspect her own family, but she felt herself being pushed further and further to the sidelines. The moment of realization. One day, during a company meeting, her father discussed a new investment deal. Tessa deliberately asked for financial details, a routine question. But instead of the direct answers he had always given her before, her father brushed her off, saying, "It's still under review." That was the moment Tessa understood. She was no longer part of the game. The slow, silent betrayal. It wasn't a sudden punch. It was a slow erosion, like a tide washing everything away without a sound. She thought back to all the times her father praised her dedication, said she was the most capable person to inherit Mitchell Enterprises. But now, she realized, his words had never truly meant anything. Connecting the dots. She started piecing everything together. Secret contracts. Major decisions made without her approval. Her father avoiding her gaze when discussing the company's future. She realized she had been so busy working, so loyal to her father, that she hadn't seen the betrayal happening in front of her. The turning point. Tessa wasn't the type to accept defeat. If her father truly wanted to replace her, he would have to face the consequences. But first, she needed to fully understand what was happening. She began digging through financial records, examining recent investments, and tracking every meeting she had been excluded from. And finally, the truth became undeniable. Her father was preparing to hand over the company to Liam. Liam, the reckless, entitled son who had never worked a serious day in his life, was about to take control of Mitchell Enterprises, and Tessa, the one who built it, protected it, and fought for it, was being discarded like a stranger. A strategic response. A part of her wanted to confront him immediately, to demand justice. But Tessa never acted on impulse. She knew this was not the time for reckless action. She needed a plan, a strategy to take back what was hers. And most of all, she needed to make them understand that they had made a grave mistake in underestimating her. She closed the financial files in front of her, her gaze steady, unwavering. If her father wanted Liam to inherit the company, then he would have to watch Liam destroy it. And when that happened, Tessa would be there, ready to end it all. The decision not to surrender, preparing for counterattack. Tessa Mitchell was not someone who easily crumbled. When she received the call from her father, informing her that Mitchell Enterprises had been handed over entirely to her younger brother, Liam, she didn't cry, didn't beg, and didn't lash out. Instead, she remained calm, suppressing every emotion, because she understood that in a power struggle, silence can sometimes be the sharpest weapon. Her father expected a different reaction. Perhaps he thought she would argue, plead, or try to prove that she was more deserving than Liam. But Tessa had no intention of playing that game. She didn't need to prove herself to someone who had never truly valued her. If her father believed he could erase her so easily, then he had made a grave mistake. When the call ended, a heavy silence filled her office. She felt a quiet, creeping pain, but instead of letting it consume her, she transformed it into determination. A storm of thoughts whirled inside her mind. This wasn't just a personal betrayal. This was war. A silent declaration of war. Tessa sat at her desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a black notebook, where she had meticulously recorded every financial transaction, every risky deal, and every mistake her father had made over the years. She hadn't gathered this information out of distrust, but because she understood the fragility of power. When you reach the top, you cannot rely solely on loyalty. You must know how to control everything. She flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning the dense notes of high-risk investments and secret business deals her father had conducted behind closed doors. Her father may have been a powerful man, but he wasn't invincible. Tessa knew every weak spot of Mitchell Enterprises, and if her father had placed all his bets on Liam, then he would have to take responsibility when the company began to fall apart. Planning the counterattack. Tessa did not act impulsively. She knew that revenge was best served as a long game. She began analyzing the company's current state, identifying flaws in the system that she could exploit. Mitchell Enterprises was expanding too rapidly, investing in industries that neither her father nor Liam truly understood. Cash flow was strained, debt was rising, and reckless mergers were being made without careful evaluation. The problem was, her father and Liam were blind to these issues. They believed they were leading the company into a new era, but in reality, they were pushing it toward collapse. And Tessa would be the one to make them realize it, in the most painful way possible. Securing allies first, she needed allies. She called Ethan Carter, once her father's close friend, but now disillusioned with the company's current leadership. Ethan recognized Tessa's value and agreed to back her up. Then she began reaching out to key personnel, trusted executives and managers who had worked with her for years and who believed in her more than Liam. It didn't take long before key employees started leaving Mitchell Enterprises. And they weren't leaving alone, they were joining Tessa. The most knowledgeable people, the real minds behind the company's operations, chose to follow her. Tessa didn't need to steal power, she only needed to let them decide who was truly worthy of leadership. Waiting for the perfect moment. Tessa didn't rush her attack. She allowed her father and Liam to continue making mistakes, to let the company spiral further into crisis. When Mitchell Enterprises lost a crucial deal with Harlan Tech, she knew her moment had come. Tessa didn't have to destroy the company. Her father and Liam were doing it themselves. They had been too arrogant, too convinced that Tessa was irrelevant, while she had been controlling everything from behind the scenes. Ready to strike. When her father finally realized how dire the situation was, when Liam began to panic, they would come crawling back to her for help. But Tessa wouldn't return so easily. She wasn't the abandoned daughter anymore. She was now the one holding all the power. She stood by her office window, gazing over the Austin skyline, where she had spent years building her career. Her father thought he could control her, but the truth was, Tessa had never needed him to succeed. If Mitchell Enterprises could be handed away so easily, then it could be destroyed just as easily. And Tessa would be the one to decide when that happened. Building a new legacy. Lessons in strategy and self-worth. Tessa Mitchell understood that power struggles are not won alone. After her father's betrayal, she didn't act on emotions. She built a calculated and strategic plan. This was more than just personal revenge. It was a lesson in self-worth, in building alliances, and in using resources wisely. She didn't cling to the past. Instead, she understood a crucial truth. If you are rejected from one place, don't waste time clinging to it. Find a new path to prove your value. Tessa didn't fight her father or Liam to reclaim the company. Instead, she created her own enterprise, where she had full control. A critical lesson in both business and life. Don't waste energy on what is beyond your control. Focus on what you can build. But success is never achieved alone. She knew she needed the right people by her side. The fall of Mitchell Enterprises. Tessa understood that the best revenge was not a direct attack, but letting her enemies destroy themselves. Her father and Liam were too arrogant to realize the dangers they had created for their own company. As they expanded recklessly, they invested in areas they didn't understand, throwing money into projects without a solid strategy. Liam was not a true leader. While Tessa had spent years studying finance, negotiating deals, and stabilizing the company, Liam had only known how to spend money and give orders. He didn't know how to manage people, didn't understand company finances, and most importantly, he didn't have the trust of senior executives. Tessa didn't need to convince people to leave. She simply gave them a better alternative. When senior managers saw Liam's incompetence and the company's instability, they naturally gravitated toward Tessa. They knew that she was the only one who could provide clear direction. The breaking point. One of Mitchell Enterprises' most crucial deals was acquiring Harlan Tech, a logistics company with massive potential. But because Liam mismanaged the negotiations and made impulsive decisions, the deal collapsed, damaging the company's reputation among investors. That was the first major blow to Mitchell Enterprises. Tessa didn't need to attack. She just watched and waited as Liam's mistakes pushed the company toward destruction. And when everything began to crumble, she would be there, ready to take back what was rightfully hers. Mitchell Enterprises was once a formidable business empire, built on vision and meticulous strategy. But everything changed when Tessa Mitchell's father pushed her out of the company and handed it over to Liam, a man completely unfit for leadership. What her father failed to understand was that a company cannot survive on a name alone. It needs people who truly understand and operate it. A company without leadership. When Tessa left, she took with her the loyalty of the company's most critical personnel. Those who had worked closely with her knew that Liam could not secure the company's future. Gradually, they left Mitchell Enterprises, seeking leadership that was stable and competent, and many of them chose to work with Tessa instead. Meanwhile, Mitchell Enterprises began to show its fatal weaknesses. The reckless investments Liam had made failed to generate profit, instead pushing the company into a precarious financial state. Investors lost confidence, major contracts were canceled, and the company's reputation took a severe hit. Negative news began to spread. Harlan Tech refused to proceed with the acquisition deal, citing concerns over poor leadership. The media started questioning Liam's management abilities, and internal instability within the company grew. Not only did Mitchell Enterprises lose its clients, but it also lost its best employees. The very people who had once driven its success. Tessa's father eventually realized his mistake. But by then, it was too late. The consequences he thought would never happen were unfolding right before his eyes. And as Mitchell Enterprises teetered on the brink of collapse, he could do nothing but stand and watch, powerless against the reality that he had brought this upon himself. Meanwhile, Tessa didn't have to lift a finger. She knew the company would destroy itself, and when the right moment arrived, she would take whatever was left, not to salvage it, but to build something greater, something stronger, something that no longer bore the name Mitchell Enterprises. A father's too-late realization. As Mitchell Enterprises plunged into crisis, Tessa's father finally acknowledged his mistake. But by then it was far too late. The company he had once been so proud of, the one he had believed would thrive under his son's leadership, was now on the verge of total collapse. The people he trusted had abandoned him. The most critical deals had fallen apart, and investors were panicking, trying to pull out before the company crashed completely. When the Harlan Tech acquisition failure made headlines, he knew his time was running out. The company was bleeding financially, market trust was non-existent, and most importantly, he had no one left to rely on. Liam, the son he had placed all his faith in, was utterly useless. Liam had no solutions, no strategies to turn the company around. All he could do was blame others, the media, the market, even the employees. But he never once took responsibility for his own incompetence, and that was when he called Tessa. A desperate plea for help. For the first time in his life, Tessa's father, a man known for his arrogance, who always believed he was right, swallowed his pride. When Tessa picked up the call, his voice was no longer firm, no longer confident. Instead, it was filled with exhaustion, anxiety, and regret. "Tessa, we need to talk." But Tessa didn't respond immediately. She let the silence stretch, making him fully absorb the loss he had brought upon himself. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, emotionless. "I'm no longer involved with Mitchell Enterprises. Remember? That was your decision." She could hear his heavy sigh from the other end of the line. "Tessa, I know you're angry, but the situation is bad. The company is in serious financial trouble. We need you to come back." That sentence might have meant something if he had said it earlier. But now that the company was in freefall, now that he had no other choice, no, it meant nothing to her anymore. She leaned back in her chair, gazing out over the Austin skyline, a city she had once believed was tied to Mitchell Enterprises. But not anymore. Now, she had something better. "I'm busy, Dad. Good luck." And she hung up. The power shift was complete. Her father had once believed he could decide her fate, but now he was the one begging her to save him. But Tessa was not someone who cleaned up other people's messes. She had created her own path, and she no longer needed Mitchell Enterprises to prove her worth. She left them to deal with the consequences of their own actions. And she moved forward, stronger than ever. Tessa's ultimate victory. Mitchell Enterprises, once considered untouchable, now stood at the edge of ruin. The poor decisions of Liam, the overconfidence of her father, And the consequences of their betrayal had pushed the company into an irrecoverable state. But Tessa didn't just sit and watch. She seized every opportunity to claim what was rightfully hers. She didn't need loud, public revenge. She didn't need threats or direct confrontation. Instead, she let them destroy themselves. Tessa understood that true power does not come from holding a name. It comes from controlling everything behind the scenes. And when Mitchell Enterprises declared bankruptcy, she was ready to claim what was left. A strategic takeover. When the company officially collapsed, its assets were put up for auction. For Tessa's father, this was a nightmare. Watching the company he spent his life building being sold off piece by piece. But for Tessa, this was an opportunity. Through her own private firm, she acquired the most valuable remnants of Mitchell Enterprises. The most lucrative contracts the company had. The best employees, who had already followed her. The most valuable assets, which her father had carelessly lost. She didn't just take back what was hers, she made it entirely her own. Mitchell Enterprises was no longer a corporate giant. It was now nothing more than an empty name, worthless and forgotten. The final encounter. When her father stepped into her new office, he was no longer the powerful man he once was. He looked worn, aged, and defeated, as if the years had caught up to him in just a few months. He glanced around, seeing firsthand what Tessa had built. Something even greater than Mitchell Enterprises had ever been. "You really did it." His voice was a mix of bitterness and regret. Tessa looked at him, and for the first time, she felt nothing. "I did what needed to be done, Dad." Her father took a deep breath, as if searching for an excuse, an explanation, but he knew there was nothing he could say. Because he had placed his bets on the wrong person, and he had lost everything. "I was wrong." Tessa held his gaze, but she no longer needed to hear those words. She had already won, and that was all that mattered. When her father walked away, this time, she didn't look back. She had won absolutely, and this time she didn't need anyone's validation to know her worth.